No, I don't think so. I think it's a one-day story. It's important to remember that Chris Christie is not beloved among New Hampshire Republicans. In fact, since we've been measuring favorability ratings and some other numbers, he has by far the lowest favorability rating of any of the Republicans running in the New Hampshire primary, including Asa Hutchinson. And we see that 60% of likely Republican primary voters have an unfavorable opinion of Christie. And in a poll that we did back in November and earlier polls, we're seeing 50 to 60% of New Hampshire Republican primary voters say they wouldn't vote for Christie under any circumstances. So he had a very hard ceiling on his attempts to grow his support in New Hampshire, and it really wouldn't have mattered how much money he spent. He was pretty much capped just by being the person who's been attacking Trump for so long.
Well, so it sounds like he was just looking at his own numbers and came to grips with reality. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair assessment of it. He really has no chance in any of the other early primary states, certainly not in Iowa. He's been banking his entire campaign essentially on New Hampshire, and he hasn't really gotten much of anywhere. It's also important to remember that voters in New Hampshire, despite there being campaigns are going on, are just really making up their minds right now. Exit polls have shown historically that upwards of 40 to 45% make up their minds over the final weekend of the race, and upwards of 15 to 20% make up their mind on election day. So I think he's seen that he doesn't really have an avenue in New Hampshire because of that hard ceiling of unfavorability. He certainly doesn't have any capacity of doing well in Iowa or South Carolina, the next race, or even Michigan. So he had to do well in New Hampshire or get out. And I think he read the cards and said, it's better to get out before I lose more money in this game.
So is this advantage Nikki Haley? I referenced your poll from earlier as we consider second choices. 65% of Christie supporters said that they would turn to Nikki Haley if he was not on the ballot. Is that a number you expect to see turn over?
It's kind of hard to say because, again, there's a week and a half left and we'll see what happens in Iowa. If DeSantis stays in, if DeSantis drops out, how big or not Trump's margin is in Iowa. So there's still some things to happen between now and Election Day. But if you think overall about the Republican electorate, we've had a consistently 40% or so of people in New Hampshire that have been behind Trump. And we're seeing 80 to 90% of them say they've definitely decided who they're going to support. So I think Trump's got his base there, but I don't think it's going to grow that much because people know who Trump is. They're not waiting for anything new to hear from Trump that's going to make them lean his way. So we have about 40% for Trump, about 60% who aren't necessarily for Trump. And those are the voters that all of the other Republican candidates were going after. Haley seems to have done, I think, the best job of threading the needle of not attacking Trump, and so as not to tick off the MAGA base, but also to let people know that she's the alternative to Trump. And I think that Christie dropping out, his supporters aren't necessarily big Haley supporters, but they know that they're not Trump supporters. And they're going for the person who's not Trump. And I think that right now is Haley, and that's why she's likely to pick up most of the support that Christie has.
Well, and that would be a pretty big deal if your poll has Donald Trump just single digits in the spread. She's within single digits of Trump. You add the Christie vote, he's at double digits. And we've got a real race here, Andrew.
I think so. I think that, again, it's important to remember voters in New Hampshire don't make up their minds until the end. They're really just starting to pay attention now. You've got that block of people that don't like Trump that are, and probably aren't that politically engaged, who are really starting to pay attention to this race. So she's peaking at the right time, and I think she could make it close. This has happened before. If you go back to 2008 with John McCain, who peaked at the very end of that race. Hillary Clinton coming back and peaking in New Hampshire in 2008 on the Democratic side as well. This is not an unusual sort of phenomenon. The flip side of that is Ron DeSantis a year ago was leading this race. He had 43% and Trump had 30%. He peaked way too early before the race really got engaged and before voters were paying attention.
You'll be glad to know Rick Davis, who's on our panel every day, will be following you and has some pretty interesting insights, having managed John McCain's campaign in New Hampshire. Andrew, remember the crying moment, the emotional moment that Hillary Clinton had? You're referring to her kind of last-minute turn to her benefit in New Hampshire. Does Nikki Haley, or by the way, we haven't even mentioned a guy named Ron DeSantis. Do they need a moment like that? Because they're going to come flying to New Hampshire the minute the Iowa caucuses are over. And they'll have a week to make a difference, basically, to your point, with those late decision makers in New Hampshire. Does Nikki Haley need to have a human moment, have a catalyst like that that'll get people's attention?
I don't really think so. If you remember that 2008 cycle with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, there were already only two candidates. Obama had come off of a win in Iowa, and there were only 5 days between Iowa and New Hampshire. The things that happened with Clinton were that there was that debate on Saturday night where the moderator asked her why she was unlikable and how did that make her feel, and she said it hurt her feelings. And Barack Obama said snarkily, "Well, you're likable enough, Hillary." And then she had that humanizing, crying moment there, and it really galvanized support from Democratic women to say, "Oh yeah, she is being picked on again. This is sexism again in the party. Let's go for Hillary here." I don't think we have that dynamic going on this time around. It's really Trump versus the non-Trump, and I think Iowa is going to make the decision for DeSantis as to whether he's in the race or not after Iowa, because his polling numbers here in New Hampshire are declining. He's now in fourth place in New Hampshire, even behind Vivek Ramaswamy, or he's in fifth place, excuse me. He's behind Vivek here. So he doesn't have much of an opportunity in New Hampshire, I think, to grow his support. It's been declining for a year. And if he doesn't make an extraordinary showing in Iowa, I think his campaign has to make the decision to pull the plug.
Wow. You do wonder in the next week how much of this field is going to clear out. Emerson is out with new numbers today as well as we spend time with Andrew Smith at the University of New Hampshire. It looks in New Hampshire like this, in this poll at least, Trump 44, Haley 28, and then Christie 12. DeSantis is in single digits. How much noise is in these numbers? You've made the point several times, Andy, that people make this decision late in New Hampshire, and you've got the unpredictable nature of, 40% of voters being independent. How much stock do you put in any of these polls of the week or so out?
I've been doing polling in the New Hampshire primary for a long time, and historically polls have been wrong as often as they've been right because voters make up their mind so late, because so many people tell us that they're going to vote, but they actually don't. Turnout is always the most difficult thing to estimate in any election, but especially in a primary election. New Hampshire, we have same-day registration. So anywhere between 10 and 15% of the electorate are people that aren't even registered, and those people are often missed by other polls who use lists of voters who've been previously registered to vote in the state. There are a number of other methodological issues that make polls quite different in the state. So I, as a pollster, I would tell anybody about primary polls, use them as a very fuzzy gauge of where the election is at any time.